Thank you for joining us today on EarthFarm. Welcome to the program. I'm Ayola Kasim. Farmers in Africa struggle to keep up with the continent's booming population and growing demand for food. Productivity has only been inching up since the 1960s, while the population has doubled in the last 3 decades. Up to 80% of the continent's food is produced by smallholders, most of whom own just a hectare or two of land. Farming practices have barely kept pace with new developments, and climate change has only made things worse for the vast majority who rely on rains that might come late or not at all. With climate change and conflict increasing food insecurity across Africa, today on the program, we start with one Malian architect who has built a fully automated greenhouse where fruits and vegetables can be grown all year round. Do stay with us. Strawberries grow at any time of the year in this fully automated greenhouse in Mali, where climate change is threatening around 80% of the population that derive their income from agriculture, which in itself accounts for 35% of the country's GDP. Rising temperatures, erratic rainfall, and creeping desertification are amongst some of the reasons Sidibe Agrotechniques built the first fully automated greenhouse in Mali in 2011. As well as working on improving food security in the volatile country, the company is creating jobs. The company had 8 workers in 2011. Today, there are more than 30, most of them women. Jihadist groups roam the northern desert region of Mali, where water reserves are precariously low and arable land is shrinking, causing tensions between communities seeking their share of dwindling resources. The modern high-tech greenhouse controlled by artificial intelligence is the first of its type to be built in Mali.
I remember when I first came here, it was something else. I was amazed with all these. And little by little, I got used to it. And well, I take care of the tomatoes from the planting all the way to the harvesting.
Sidibe Agrotechniques trains future farmers in agricultural innovation and shares their expertise with the workforce, who have seen a net increase in the production and quality of their crops at home.
Yes, of course. I want to do the same thing for myself. If I had the means, I would not hesitate to get involved in greenhouse agriculture. It's fantastic, and you never lose anything, any crop.
The greenhouse is the brainchild of Malian architect Amadou Sidibe, who today is looking to expand his 1 hectare of land 40 kilometers from the capital Bamako. The farm produces 200 tons of tomatoes a year, 60 tons of melons and 40 tons of cucumbers. He also grows lemons and coriander. He says if applied more widely across Mali, the country could stop importing tomatoes mainly from Morocco. As an architect, Sidibe traveled extensively. He got the idea of building a greenhouse after visiting Israel, where he said the climate was similar to that of Mali. Before that, he used to sell high-tech drip-feed irrigation systems for agriculture. Sidibe says controlling water is the key to conquering climate change.
In the time of our grandfathers, it used to rain and the cycle is regular. With human activity, you find that the rains are more and more irregular, the droughts are more and more frequent, and we no longer control the water. And if we no longer control water, we don't control agriculture.
And artificial intelligence is the future, thanks to a supercomputer and a drip-feed irrigation system from the Israeli company Netafim. The crops get the right amount of water and nutrients, regulates the temperature, and recycles the water for the next day.
This little computer is a technological jewel that controls irrigation for the whole farm. It controls the quantity of water for each plant. And God knows that in this farm, we have more than 40,000 plants. So this computer provides the same amount of water for all the plants, the same amount of fertilizer, And this automation enables the retrieval. So once the plants have been watered in accordance with what it needs, a certain amount remains. Normally, that is around 40%. So it retrieves that irrigation water that has not been used, full of fertilizers, it disinfects it, and stocks it for the next day's irrigation.
Nets used to cover the plants in the greenhouse also protect the crop from insects and harmful pests. Climate Change Agriculture and Food Security, an organization researching ways of combating climate change in Mali and increase farm productivity, says climate change is threatening the economic and social stability of the country. Already an increase in temperature, a decrease in rainfall, and an increase in desertification can be observed. It is also expected that there will be an increase in extreme weather events like droughts and floods. This increasing climate variability and change exacerbate human pressures on land, water, and other natural resources. Making matters worse, many Malian producers live on small-scale family farms, which are extremely vulnerable to climate change.
This computer picks up the external radiance, checks if it is too hot, and then modulates the irrigation system in relation to the sun's radiance. So you see, the yields are maxed out. By square meters for tomatoes, for example, you can get 20 kilos per square meter, whereas outside you barely get 2 to 3 kilos. You can reach 20 kilos, and the record amount is 50, 75 kilos per square meter in Quebec. We will get there one day in Africa.
At first, Sidibe was frustrated by the government's lack of interest in his greenhouse project, which began with a 300 square meter plot of land. But thanks to a loan from the World Bank in 2013, he expanded his project to half a hectare. And in 2016, that turned into 1 hectare. Today, he plans to build a 10-hectare greenhouse. Sidibe has also sold 2 greenhouses in Mali, one to Syngenta and the other to a private individual. He's also mentoring producers in West Africa, including Niger and Chad, which are severely affected by climate change. Sidibe is determined to prove that modern technology and AI agriculture is the key to overcoming the threat of climate change and food insecurity in one of the poorest countries of the world. The architect who designed the monument to independence in Bamako says that if nothing is done against climate change, Africa won't be able to feed her children, and that means war. And his words are true, at least as witnessed in some parts of Ethiopia. First, drought in Ethiopia's Oromia region destroyed Asha Khalif Alif's crops and animals. Then her husband and brother were killed in ethnic violence. She fled with her 7 children, the youngest on her back, and watched their small faces grow gaunt with hunger as they sought safety.
Because of the drought, even before the conflict happened and we got displaced, we used to have 1 meal a day, only 1 meal.
Scientists and humanitarians say Asha's story of a once prosperous family endlessly buffeted by the intertwined plagues of climate change and violence will become more familiar around the world as repeated disasters push families into competition for ever scarcer resources. In January, the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees said the world needs to prepare for millions more climate change refugees and cited a UN ruling that such people deserve international protection. Behind each number lies a story of suffering. For Asha, the drought that ended 2 years ago exacerbated simmering tensions over resources between ethnic groups. After gunmen from a rival ethnic group killed her husband, she fled into the mountains with her children. They marched barefoot for 5 days. The children's feet bled. Her milk dried up. When they finally reached a safe village, Asha collapsed. She and 4 of her children were hospitalized. They found refuge in the village of Tuli Guled in the eastern Somali region, where the International Committee of Red Cross gave them seeds and tools. Then heavy rains and desert locusts destroyed her crops and her hope. The World Meteorological Organization says more extreme weather events linked to temperature rises of 3 to 5 degrees Celsius can be expected if carbon dioxide emissions, which hit a new record in 2018, keep rising at the current rate. Ethiopia had the highest number of new internally displaced people in the world in 2018, 2.9 million according to the Geneva-based Internal Displaced Monitoring Center. Some fled drought or floods, others fled clashes. It's hard to measure the impact of climate change on violence, and it is not the cause of all inter-ethnic conflicts in Ethiopia, which have fled since Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed took power in April 2018. His political and economic reforms, though widely praised, have also unleashed long-repressed tensions among Ethiopia's myriad ethnic groups as they lay claim to disputed territory. However, recent data and testimonies from displaced people such as Asha demonstrate the complex interaction between climate change and violence.
What strikes me as well is how many make the link today between the experience of violent conflict and climate change. They make the relation that the shrinking livelihoods, the struggle over less productive land is at the origin of much of what they suffer after a couple of years of experiencing drought, for instance. Then they experience violence. And their experience is one of a lifetime where they struggled with other things in the past, with only drought, but now they struggle with all aspects of the changing environment leading to conflict and violence.
For many, the environmental challenges are so unbearable. Ethiopian farmer Ahmed Ibrahim battered empty water bottles at a swarm of desert locusts the size of his palms that were devouring his field of cut, the mildly narcotic leaf that is his family's main source of income.
The locusts arrived this morning. They are causing damage to my cod farms, the grass and the vegetation on my land. This will render the farm useless and make us vulnerable to drought and hunger.
The locusts devoured Ibrahim's small grazing plot as his donkeys brayed anxiously and goats scrambled to eat the remaining foliage.
We're using 3 methods to chase the locust away. The first method is to light fires because the smoke will chase it away. Secondly, we take sticks and run through the farms, beating the bushes and disturbing them. And third, we disturb them by waving our scarves or blankets or by making noise with cans or plastic bottles.
Scenes like these are happening across the Horn of Africa, where swarms of desert locusts have damaged tens of thousands of hectares so far. The Food and Agriculture Organization said breeding is continuing on both sides of the Red Sea, in Sudan and Eritrea, and in Saudi Arabia and Yemen, the FAO said.
The vegetation you see in front of you is shared by our goats, cows and camels. So the more the locusts feed on them, the more they will leave them bare. So we foresee a drought coming because our livestock will be left without anything to feed on.
It's time for the international community to understand that it is an issue that needs to be dealt with now. Otherwise, we will turn a situation of a plague. There will be high level of acute food insecurity. There will be million more people that will require food assistance, and it will take us years to control this situation.
Kenya began aerial spraying in the north in January to head off the invasion.
It is specific to target organisms, and so it is tested for safety, all-round safety to the environment, water bodies, people, and also to non-target organisms. So it's specific to desert locusts.
The swarms spread from Ethiopia and Somalia into eastern and northern Kenya recently, threatening food production and the economy.
The farmers, we are telling them not to be worried. They are safe. They have been able to contain the locusts in the pastoral areas. We are clearing them in this zone, and therefore there is no cause for alarm. Their farms are safe. They will not be invaded. They should just concentrate on their normal day-to-day work. There should be no panic at all.
Kenyan media showed police shooting bullets and tear gas at an oncoming swarm as residents banged on buckets and hooted their car horns to try to frighten the insects. A farmers' association in Kenya's northern Laikipia region said it was planning area spraying of pesticide to combat the worst locust plague since 1954. The FAO estimated one swarm in Kenya to be 40 kilometers wide by 60 kilometers long. The human and financial costs of climate-related flooding are already much higher, longer-lasting and far-reaching than we thought. A study produced by researchers at the Columbia University and the University of California, Berkeley, found that a single hurricane can cause a country's national income to decline for the next 20 years. Another study found that without large-scale adaptations, river flooding could cause a 17% increase in global economic losses over the next 20 years. Even a relatively small flood can have unexpected costs months later. In the United States, the heavy rainfall from Hurricane Irma in September 2017 caused severe flooding in Immokalee, Florida. That happens to be where much of the country's winter fresh market tomato crop is grown, and where Wilson Perez, one of the farm workers who picked those tomatoes, happened to live. Perez and his 4-year-old son, Jose, spent a week huddling in a local high school with hundreds of others until the floodwaters went down. Afterwards, they faced the kind of devastation that is becoming more and more familiar across the globe. Wreckage and muddy garbage-laden waters that left the whole area smelling foul for weeks. Perez and his neighbors all got sick, especially the children, after being cooped up inside the shelter for what would normally have been their first week of school. The children wanted to play outside. When Immokalee's tomato pickers finally returned to the ramshackle, overpriced trailers where they live, it was impossible to stop their children from jumping in the dirty water.
It also affected a lot of people as well, not only us. People who lived next to us were affected by the flu and cough a little more because it was very bad. The smell of the water and mud and all of that, and I think that affected us a lot as well as those who were living there.
Most of the physical damage to fields and farm workers was eventually repaired, but the disruption to fields and to farm workers' lives delayed the winter planting season. 2 months later, that resulted in a shortage of tomatoes, and that in turn led prices to go up as high as double across the country, from California to Illinois.
I was scared. I was very scared of what I was going to come back to. And from what I heard, I only heard that our roof was torn down and it looked pretty bad. So I was kind of worried. Not really scared, but worried that we had to come here and do more, waste more money to fix everything. It was kind of scary.
Climate change is already having an impact on agriculture and food security as a result of increased prevalence of extreme events and increased unpredictability of weather patterns. Developing countries and smallholder farmers and pastoralists in particular are being especially hard hit by these changes. Many of these small-scale producers are already coping with a degraded natural resource base. They often lack knowledge about potential options for adapting their production systems and have limited assets and risk-taking capacity to access and use technologies and financial services.
Agriculture is both a problem but also a solution in terms of climate change. If you want to really counter the effect of climate change, you have to take agriculture into consideration. It's not only the energy and the transport sector, but agriculture is both impacted by climate change, the only sector that is actually impacted by climate change, but it's also the sector that can provide solutions to climate change. When you do reforestation, when you sequester carbon into the ground, this all has positive impact. Well, women are in general, especially in poorer countries, are definitely more vulnerable than men when it comes to climate change. They're more vulnerable because they might not have access to finance as much as men, or they might not have land in their name, which they can use as collateral to get a loan. They might not even have access to technology like men, or they might not even have access to information like men have access to information. So all of these things make women more vulnerable than men and giving them less voice than men. So we need to focus on women, especially in places where actually most of the agricultural labor is done by women and not by men. You have parts of the world where you have the migration of men from the rural areas to the urban areas, or even to outside, to another country. Who's left behind? Who's working on the land? It's the women.
Livelihood and climate-focused agricultural practices help farmers to sustainably increase their farm productivity and build resilience to climate change, while contributing to mitigation. But how does this type of farming, commonly known as climate-smart agriculture, interact with gender in real-life communities?
So women produce about 40% of the world's food, but in most of the places where CARE works, they're not even recognized as farmers, which means that they do not have access to the information that can help them increase productivity, or most importantly, adapt to climate change. They don't have access to inputs like seeds and fertilizer that could help them adapt. They don't have access to land, most importantly. So we're asking them to produce a lot of the world's food, but constraining them from having the resources to do so. They have a lot of knowledge about traditional practices, but they're also early adapters and early adopters of new practices. If you're able to connect them to the resources and the markets and the information that they need, they take it and run with it. And they scale it in a way that an organization like CARE could not do on their own. We really rely on the innovation and the entrepreneurial spirit of women to be able to carry the ball to the next stage.
In most countries, agricultural policies and investments still fail to take into account the differences in resources available for men and women, their roles, workloads, and the differential constraints they face.
We need to have political will, political leadership, in order to put into place policies that are that promote gender equality. So, for example, policies that look at the financing of gender plans, or maybe policies that regarding land tenure of women, or even making sure that women have IDs. In some countries, women don't even have identity cards. If you don't have an identity card, you don't exist, basically. If you don't exist, then you can't get a loan, you can't get finance, etc., etc. So these are certain things that can be done at the political level. Then what we need to do, in addition to the political level, we need to make sure that women have access to the technology, to the finance, and to make sure that they are also being included in all capacity development activities. We also need to have the staffing at the ministry to do this type of work. So, for example, you have to look at the extension services. Do you have enough women in the extension services to talk to women? Because we know from experience that especially in some rural areas, you need to have women who do the extension with women. So that's another thing. And for sure, we need to have a robust monitoring and evaluation system in place, because what you don't measure, you don't do. So we have to be able to measure what we're doing and make sure that women are being included in everything that we're doing.
For millions of people across the world, climate change means more frequent and intense floods, droughts, and storms, accounting each year for up to 90% of all natural disasters. These can quickly spiral into full-blown food and nutrition crisis. In the last decade, almost half of the World Food Programme's emergency and recovery operations have been in response to climate-related disasters at a cost of $23 billion. With the vast majority of the world's hungry exposed to climate shocks, eradicating hunger requires bold efforts to improve people's ability to prepare, respond, and recover. Failing this, it has been estimated that the risk of hunger and malnutrition could increase by up to 20% by 2050. That's our program for the week. Thank you for watching. Our inbox head file at channelstv.com is available for your comments and your questions. You can also view this episode and other episodes of the program by visiting our YouTube channel, youtube.com/channelsweb. Do click the playlist menu and then click Head File. From me, Ayola Kasim, and the crew here in Lagos, it's bye for now.